Thank you, Sandra. Welcome, everybody. We're going to mix it up a little bit. Make sure that you are awake. We have scrambled photos, so make sure it's mix and match. Don't just assume whoever's in front is in front. We have a great panel this morning to kick us off. Want to introduce you to them briefly. First, on the far end, Harry Jung. He's the Deputy Director of the President's Council of Advisors for Digital Assets at the White House. We're really lucky to have him this morning. Prior to that, he was the Acting Chief of Staff at the CFTC, led their engagement on crypto, DeFi, decentralized assets. Before that, by his words, was a TradFi guy at Citigroup. So great background, very knowledgeable, and of course deep in the policy disputes that have been going on for the last 18 months and bringing a lot of good things for the industry. Next to Harry, Amanda Wick. She's the head of Americas for VerifyVASP. She was a federal prosecutor for the Department of Justice for nearly a decade. She was detailed to FinCEN as a senior policy advisor and left government to be chief of legal affairs at Chainalysis. She's also the founder of the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency, and you can all get her debut book, The Catalysts, The Accelerating Forces Forging the New World Financial Order, at your local bookseller, released in May 2025.
Actually, GBBC members can get it for free at the Author's Corner outside.
Even better, even better. Next to me is Carole House. She's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center and the CEO of Penumbra Strategies. And while doing all of that, she's currently serving as the White House National Security Council Special Advisor for Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Policy. She's also, what's that?
Former.
Ah.
Yeah, sorry. That's, yeah.
Supposed to correct?
I am sorry.
She's formally those things. She served on advisory councils for the CFTC, for New York DFS, for the Idaho Department of Finance. Was previously at FinCEN, at OMB, and the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. So a great panel. Really lucky to have everybody this morning. Great group to talk to, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion. Sorry, let me turn my pages back. So our session, Advancing American Innovation and Protecting National Security. No better way to start this than to Harry to get your view on what is the ideal posture for U.S. digital asset policy in terms of those two prerogatives, advancing American innovation and leadership and protecting national security.
Great. Well, appreciate the kind invitation by GBBC and my fellow panelists. Got to know each other in the green room a little bit. So to answer your question, on just pure innovation, I think everybody knows that, from our standpoint, we have to lead in innovation, regardless of the industry. We're trying to be, throughout history, we've been the ideal place in the financial markets for companies to IPO because of the capital, the deep liquidity. And from a NatSec perspective, and putting in the digital assets hat on, that's something that our office at the Crypto Council think about all the time. Obviously, there are a bunch of initiatives that we've already done in this administration, whether it's passing the Genius Act. Right now, obviously, there's all the notice for rule proposals and things like that. I'm sure Treasury's been very busy. They're going to be more busy as they absorb all those comments from whether it's the BSA, AML, the sanction stuff that they have to look at, and obviously I think the rule proposal has to be in July, so super busy. I have to mention market structure as well too, on the whole innovation front and why the U.S. needs to lead on this. I mean, I'm sure there's folks in this room have been working on market structure, this topic, for many, many years. I did myself in the private sector, and now I'm here doing the same topic. So I'm personally tired. I want to get this done. But why is that important from an innovation standpoint and from national security and all that? Because economic security is national security, right? And how do we get that in the U.S.? We need rules of the road, right? We need to bring this activity that go overseas and then bring it back onshore to U.S. soil, which in turn creates jobs, has the best and the brightest innovators in the U.S. to flourish and to innovate and create new products or mechanisms for capital growth, right? And this is not just now, but for the future, for also the generations to come. And the other thing I'll mention real briefly is also on the strategic Bitcoin reserve stuff. So we've been working on that continuously. Obviously there's legislation out there, which is the American Reserve Modernization Act. Rep. Begich is leading that. Why is that important? Bitcoin is an asset class. I'm sure, people are here for a reason because they understand, they appreciate the value of blockchain. Well, Bitcoin, other sovereign states around the world are identifying Bitcoin as a strategic asset class. So do we. That's why the president signed the executive order to establish the SBR. So we are thinking of creative executive branch solutions as well, but also helping out and just providing that support as needed on the Hill for actual hard-coded legislation on that front.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great overview. Let me ask Carole. Harry noted countries around the world are looking at these issues. And we're seeing legislation being put into place. Obviously, there's legislation in the EU. There's legislation in pieces and parts in the UK, in parts of the Gulf, in Asia. Given that the US is kind of now putting in place a lot of the additional pieces of infrastructure, particularly stable coins and market structure, to add to the AML and sanctions compliance work that the US has really led for many years. How can the US, both the industry and government, make sure that we're creating, what we are creating is driving standardization across the world so that we can correct some of those the issues that Harry pointed out about the industry having to work offshore, and a lot of other countries recognizing the same things that the US is recognizing, which is that it's important to lead in this space.
Yeah, and first, thank you for your patience with me on correcting that. And Alan is just brilliant, and I love that you're really like driving a scalpel into the heart of like, here's like a really tough issue that presents really core tensions and highlights them around issues like standardization. It points to some of the key problems, challenges, and opportunities that we have with blockchain around certainly competitiveness and innovation. But a key element of that too, though it creates some tensions, is around trustworthiness. Because this issue of standardization, it's a part of trying to drive greater interoperability and greater opportunity internationally, including leveling the playing field for a lot of American companies. The fact of that we've not even implemented standards, international standards that we negotiated and put in place under Trump 1.0, actually in 2019 at the FATF, which is the UN for anti-money laundering, for those not familiar with it, basically, or the ISO for AML. We've still not implemented that globally. There's still a huge amount of lagging. So having standards and policy that's not implemented is essentially feckless, and it creates a huge double standard for American companies that have been basically the most compliant sector internationally for many, many years, if not for the entirety of this industry. Like the fact that we've not been able to take and scale implementation, which includes enforcement, as well as other levers of incentives, including self-regulation in the industry, has been a major problem on standardization, and that has cost the sector a lot in its own trustworthiness as well, because of the problems when you get a lot of illicit funds going abroad. But I do think that there's some opportunities here to invest on both sides on that front. On the trustworthiness index, because I feel that this has been a huge concern, I know, for many of us and all of us in the security space, and I know many of you in this room are. Like even in 2019, I remember members of the industry would come in and say that they shouldn't have to, and this does not reflect the current state of the industry, but they would say, it's impossible to know who's on the other side of the internet. You can't regulate our disruption. And I'm like, it is patently untrue to not understand that there have been technologies that allow for understanding and creation of trust and passing of identity on the internet for decades, in fact. The question is around what is that data on identity that needs to be shared. And so I think what is needed is it demands a specificity, a realistic, honest, and intellectual honesty, both on the industry side, but also on the regulator side. Because I've seen things come out of international standards bodies that say, well, we have a data access problem with crypto. And while there certainly is a lot of off-chain data, like a lot of the things that were highlighted as data gaps, it's not that the data doesn't exist. We may not have created the market on the reg tech front to create that understanding of surveillance for market activity and looking for things like market manipulation and fraud. But like that was also not an accurate, like that was not really a nuanced understanding. So I think technical understanding and know-how, and then a real investment by the industry to focus on where standards already exist. Like I'll tell you, the way that the sector is currently getting pwned by North Korea to fund half of their proliferation program, which the sector doesn't like either, right? Like no one likes getting robbed. Like no one's happy about the fact that that's happening, but it's a lot of the same compromises that are affecting TradFi as well. Like it's a lot of third-party risk management and supply chain compromises, key management, secure software development. All of these are some of the major exploits. And a lot of people in crypto, I've spoken to major CISOs of huge exchanges for years, and there was a large amount of time where they didn't even know about the secure software development lifecycle or other key practices. So I think there's an opportunity for understanding and mapping where existing standards work and can be applied. I'm so excited that work that we put in our competitiveness framework in 2022, but that actually got implemented in this administration, the NIST workshop on blockchain security standards that just happened. This is a really good catalyst to try to drive some of that maturization. So I think a focus on trustworthiness and actually opening the door to TradFi to experiment here, I think is going to drive a lot of that.
That's great, and there's a lot to follow up in that. But I did want to, since we've been throwing around the Genius Act, which is last summer's legislation passing governing stablecoins, and the various market structure legislation provisions that are being debated on the Hill now. Maybe Amanda, can you maybe take a step back on that and just talk about kind of at a high level, what is the Genius Act about, and what is market structure legislation about? Not so much from the ins and outs of what they do, but kind of like at the higher level of innovation and of national security.
Yeah, so I get that question a lot because I think some people thought that Genius Act was very similar to market structure and that it was an economic issue, and it wasn't. It was a national security issue. And a lot of that is because even some of the Congress people I talked with at the time when the bill was under consideration didn't really understand the concept of the weaponization of the dollar through sanctions, where America gets most of its soft power, and the fact that if you have an alternative system that allows people globally to purchase dollars, that is located completely outside of the United States, that isn't supervised, that isn't regulated, and it's also now, I believe, the second largest private holder of US treasuries globally, that's a risk to US monetary policy, right? That's a giant risk if lots of treasuries are being bought by a company abroad and nobody was paying attention. And I mean, a disturbing lack of Congress people really were not paying attention to this. Even some of the ones that we talked to would say Bitcoin and stablecoins as if they were the same thing, as if a Bitcoin and Ethereum was the same as a stablecoin because it's all crypto. Like that's, to Carole's point, like the terrifying lack of nuance sometimes in the policymaking space was leading to some really scary things, right? So when you're looking at Genius, it is not about market structure and economic security. It was about the fact that you have trillions of dollars in retail global demand that is being satisfied by stablecoins in countries like Venezuela, Nigeria, Argentina. You have people who want an alternative to their hyperinflationary currency, who were, instead of buying dollars on the street, open a crypto exchange account, now work remotely for companies and get paid in stable coins, right? That is huge because that demand is fueling the purchase of treasuries, which is great when you're in a debt crisis, right? So Genius was a no-brainer. But thank God we had bipartisan support, because if we hadn't, it would have been an absolute embarrassment to Congress, right? Conversely, with market structure, like with all due respect to Harry, agree in the sense that economic security is a national security issue, but realistically, if we didn't get market structure and we just got a regulator that stopped crapping on an industry harshly and unnecessarily and arbitrarily, you'd be pretty good. Like economically, we could get by, right? Like in the sense that a lot of folks who went abroad to avoid enforcement actions that sometimes were valid and sometimes were horrifically invalid, and there were no rules of the road. So as much as like I think a lot of us definitely see the need for market structure and want market structure to happen, and to be clear, even if it doesn't happen before the midterms, Carole and I are on the board of a group called Open Frontier that is trying to educate and engage, because the need for market structure clarity is 100% there. Maybe it doesn't look like the bill that we have, we'll see, But like, it's a very different discussion of what does the CFTC regulate and what does the SEC regulate, and getting market clarity for participants versus the issue of you've got trillions of dollars being purchased and held by a completely unregulated, unsupervised entity that if they liquidated tomorrow could swing global monetary policy, and you have no AML supervision, you have no look into their sanctions evasion program. So they've basically built an entire secondary dollar system that, unfortunately, to Carole's point, North Korea and Russia are absolutely using to evade sanctions. So you have to not only look at this beautiful technology, which is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral, but you have to look at how people are using it. And in a world where the dollar was so effectively weaponized after 9/11, highly recommend Juan Zarate's Treasury War, which I talk about in the book because people don't realize what happened. In a world of weaponization of the dollar, even our allies have been working to get off of the US dollar since the Iraqi war. You create a digital alternative in the trillions that provides that liquidity, and you better understand the national security risk of weakening the US soft power by creating a digital dollar system that is not regulated or controlled in the United States. And I think that's the part that sometimes gets lost.
Well, and I think that's a good point to build on. You know, one of the things that I saw when I was in the U.S. government, when I was at Homeland Security, was there's a temptation among government policymakers to think that technology can be kind of stamped out by regulation or by just kind of a frowning upon of the technology, and that's just not the way that the emergence of technology really tends to work. Once technology is here, government really needs to figure out how to harness, adapt, manage, referee the use of the technology. Otherwise, you end up with those types of approaches where you demonize an entire industry, and it becomes very difficult to view who's good, who's bad. At Homeland Security, we had actually big debates about how to expand the trusted traveler programs, because why put on law enforcement and regulators the idea of assuming everybody is bad and then trying to weed them out? Why not take off large chunks of people, in this instance the industry, and say, no, these people are following the rules. It's the people outside the rule set that we're looking at. So, but you made a couple of interesting points. Harry, you noted economic security as national security, but it's also, economics, as Amanda, you were saying, is an instrument of national power. So, I mean, Harry, do you feel like the debates around the policy are really capturing those high level, this is about US power, this is about national security, and it's also about, as Amanda has said, that technology is here and it's being used every day in increasing ways, some of which we anticipated, some of which we didn't. Do you feel like that's really breaking through that level of, what these policy debates are about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we got Genius on a bipartisan basis, because there was an understanding of how important US dollar dominance is. First of all, right, it is the world's reserve currency. So, and I'll take that as a tremendous win for us and from an admin perspective, and that's why it was so important. We went from in 7 months to the president's desk, right? We did not have rules on I call it PIPSs and things like that, and also foreign payment coin stabilizers before that, right? We got it done, right? And there was, on both sides of the aisle, I've been going through the whole, going back, maybe a little PTSD here, but going through the Genius process, we were on the Hill talking to both sides of the Hill on the importance of why Genius is critical for maintaining the US as a superpower, obviously the reserve currency. To your point, I mean, yes, there's obviously, there may be activity offshore and things like that, but there's a reason why, the rulemaking, I think today is literally the day for the end of the comment period. So that's the whole whole point of an NPRM. For the public to comment on, okay, if there's anything that the public deems that the U.S. government should take into consideration, give us your opinions. And then we have a robust team at Treasury and across the government. And one thing to know, I've come from the private sector before this, and and being in my shoes now and talking to my fellow colleagues in government, it is very refreshing to see folks who are, whether it's at Treasury, whether it's at Commerce, OCC, or whatever, CFTC, SEC, were folks who actually did crypto or did blockchain in these these policymaking positions, and they're going to have a tremendous duty to whether write rules, to review all the comment letters, where they already had a good baseline foundation of trying to do this in the private sector, because we all know that the innovation happens way faster in the private sector, and now in these policy decision-making positions. So I think that helped out with the whole Genius process too, and especially folks in this room, here at the panel, like going to the Hill, talking to the folks, like educating members. That was tremendously helpful. So it was truly a whole team effort. I think that's why you were able to see from January to July, getting a massive piece of legislation done, and that's why it was critically important.
Could I just follow up? Because I think the critical importance of that can't be understated, is that the objectivity that you're seeing in government agencies right now, especially from kind of some of the career folks and the people who are on these working groups or who are talking about it, that's the thing that is so refreshing, because sadly there were so few people, in fact maybe 80% of them are sitting on stage from the last administration, right? But like seeing that, and now to your point about the technology, the problem is we have to be able to talk about the evolution in the use cases, right? Because the US has always had a problem where the use cases might not be so obvious. If a bunch of people don't do remittances, then you might not understand why crypto is so insanely important, right? Which, shameless plug, if you did not grab the use case book that GBBC puts out, it's like a little mini Bible that you can take with you everywhere and show everybody. Every time somebody says the asinine statement, "A blockchain is a solution in search of a problem," right? The next time some moron says that to you, hand them that book and say, "I'm assuming you're literate, just start reading," right? It is one of the things, but interestingly, let me contrast that with crypto kiosks, right? Which, when they came out, were a technology that, oh, this kind of makes sense. Maybe it's hard to get an exchange. Maybe it's difficult to get an. Now it's about 95 to 98% scams, frauds, and ruining the elderly population as a whole. And the market model doesn't make sense. So you have to go back and then say, did this technology make sense? Was there a positive use case? It has to be a nuanced, objective evaluation that changes based on facts. And if we could get to that point, I think we'd see some amazing things. But if it just stays calling all balls, to steal your analogy earlier, all balls or all strikes, and it's just industry says crypto's the solution to everything and government says all technology bad, we will continue to get horrible results. I think what a lot of us are excited about are these rules and the objective discussion and like, let's talk about it. But we have to be able to move past that kind of like sledgehammer instead of scalpel discussion, where we need to be able to talk about, but what is the situation now, right? The US is in a different place. Different things are happening. Does the technology still make sense? Is it still benefiting the US economy? And if you can't adapt, then we will die. And I think that's what a lot of us are worried about.
Yeah, if you don't mind, because I love this point, because it goes back to, I think, what some of the conditions are about driving competitiveness, and then my mention of the trustworthiness index issue not being something that I feel decentralized communities have a hard time organizing. I get that. I think that you're totally right on the use case front, and I love that, pointing to that resource all the time. And it's been very funny, because coming from a hard cyber world, like crypto doesn't get talked about in most cyber communities, even in like the DEF CON hacker communities, unless it's being invoked in ire, talking about pig butchering and ransomware. And but what's been fascinating has been like in the wake and growth of agentic AI and experimentation here, for the first time ever, I'm seeing AI guys and some cyber guys that had been ignoring and discounting blockchain as, in their view, an arbitrary and overly costly and not valuable database technology. They're now paying attention to it, because when they're trying to do like agentic commerce, and the fact that the US government never really, like, we spent decades not investing in building and experimenting other forms of digital dollars, and like, and we can get into what that means, because stablecoins are a form of digital dollar, of course. But there's other non-blockchain based ones. Of course, CBDCs are rife with all of their fun problems. But that experimentation had never really happened. We've not made the dollar available instantly, globally, to even our trusted partners, and even in a wholesale way. And and because industry came in and like the private sector did, now for the first time, when in agentic commerce, like, oh, I have to wait 3 to 5 days for an ACH transfer to settle. That's not like, so now for the first time ever, I'm seeing like guys that have been ignoring Web3 and crypto starting to actually play in and experiment with it. And I'm excited about that because a lot of those guys are ones that understand things like operational risk, that understand cybersecurity. And I'll tell you that, like, so in this case, Web2, like when I saw a major internet service provider announce that they're playing in stablecoins, I'm like, I am here for Web2 competing with Web3. I'm here for TradFi competing with Web3. I think it's going to be a market cycle of experimentation and competition that I think is going to drive some really good lessons from each side that's extremely important here. But then, and especially when, like, as you mentioned, like this, the challenge that right now, the state of the industry that needs to look in the mirror a bit in some ways, like we cannot be in a position where we're okay with offshore stablecoins providing billions in liquidity and access to our greatest adversaries, which is exactly what's happening right now. Like that is a huge concern. On the security side, we don't want this to we don't want this world of this financial system that we want to promote competitiveness in, but to be providing access for a very attractive laundering tool for ransomware as a service ecosystems, pig butchering, and I'm very worried about that front, but I'm also excited. I think the competition is what's going to drive this evolution. So I'm excited about that.
I want to jump in so bad, but Alan, go. I want to get.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
It's because as you were saying that, I was like, let me play devil's advocate. That's a very American-centric viewpoint, right? Like in the sense of, oh, it is so great that private industry replaced the U.S. dollar, that private industry make the profit off of payments, that private industry, right, cancel CBDCs, eliminate the concept of payments as a public good. I can't wait for Wyoming Stable Token Commission to come up later and talk about an alternative concept, right? Like, it's an American idea that we should privatize all of these things and allow companies to make profit off of things that were historically public good and government-provided services.
I'm with you. To me, this is the catalyst to get the government to step in to innovate, like where it should have been doing for years. So that's what I mean is that I think,
and I see what you're saying. To play devil's advocate to that, we have never done that proactively.
Oh yeah,
we have only ever done that in reaction to a crisis or a disaster. Every major change in the United States has been in response to either 9/11 and suddenly we got AML laws and terrorist financing protection, or you had all of the statutory change after the global financial crisis, after we literally ruined the world for a while. So it's an interesting thing to think that suddenly everything's going to be different and we're going to suddenly get all this regulatory innovation. If you even look at what's happening now, it's really a response to the prior administration and a very strategic determination. Trump won. I was actually in the private sector when they put out the notice of proposed rulemaking under Mnuchin to basically shut down crypto and unhosted wallets, right? Then you have the Biden administration for 4 years, different view on crypto and digital assets. And then you have Trump 2, who's decidedly pro-crypto, but let's be clear, like that was 4 years of research discussion, like coming to a different conclusion than when they came back in, right? So you've seen more regulatory innovation, I would say, in almost 2 years than you've probably seen in 20, right? And that's a really huge deal. That's a whiplash. I think one of my concerns, going back to something you said, is that from a global perspective, the standards discussion, the role of the FATF, like the role of all of that has really decreased. And we just, I think, finished Treasury's mutual evaluation under FATF, and there are a number of things we're probably going to get dinged at. I say this because I live in the world of travel rule. That's probably one of them because our travel rule is far below the standard that FATF would have it at, which means that there are actively exchanges in the United States that are not collecting counterparty information because they do not verify. So I can send money and say that I'm sending it to Mickey Mouse, and if Mickey Mouse is I almost said Al-Qaeda because I'm aging myself, but hijab, or Iran, North Korea. Pick like your favorite horror, and if that's who's actually behind Mickey Mouse, that's a giant problem that we have in the United States from a national security perspective in insufficient BSA AML rules that aren't compliant with global standards, right? So like in a dream world, right, we could take all of the regulatory innovation that's looking at economic power and national security, and then also like just not forget kind of like the roots of, but national security was always way more than that, right? And we actually need to know where the money is going and who the money is flowing to And if that's the case, there are a lot of things that we need to do here, which is why a lot of us are so excited about the BSA modernization and the OFAC FinCEN and PRM, because we need to move that really further ahead. There's so many things that Carole and others worked at FinCEN that have been sitting in a basement, and they all need to collectively be brought up. We need beneficial ownership. We need all these things. I strongly recommend you read Carole's House testimony in front of Financial Services a couple weeks ago, which was an incredible blueprint for how the country could fix a lot of these things. But like, if we don't talk about the ramifications of not fixing those things, my fear is it's going to take a North Korea attack and Iran, like we're already at war. There's already these things that are percolating that you have tons of movement of money that we're not doing enough about because we're so excited that something's being done, and it feels almost gluttonous to say, but we need to do more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll
ahead,
start.
Rick.
I mean, and I'll cover like other topics that y'all. So obviously with Genius, you know, we had nothing, right? Let's just put it first, right?
Yeah.
Right. And
No payment starter.
And we have something that's signed into law, and then all the BSA, AML, CFT, all that is in there. Maybe at you know, you guys are experts in that space, obviously in government and private sector and all that. So, but we all need to start, and obviously we have a robust treasury team right now who are looking into all that, and not to mention also in market structure, there's a tremendous amount of law enforcement, BSA, AML, and all those provisions in there for a reason. So I'll put that plug in for that one. On the kiosk, and that's interesting. I've been looking into that as well. Like, my view is that we shouldn't be able to like limit commerce, right? Like everybody has a right to like conduct business, right? Obviously, even in market structure, there are rules and language in the current market structure bill right now. I mean, you might have a different opinion on like how it should be done or whatsoever, but obviously, with Treasury oversight, reporting, chief compliance officer, and all that stuff. Obviously, states are very different in how they're managed that right now. So I just wanted to put that plug as well. And then on the NIST thing you mentioned, so that was, I mean, I think there's some commerce folks in here too. Like actually that derived out of the Presidential Working Group report that we released. I mean, you've been working on a long time on standard. I wanted to do that for a long time, but we released that PWG report, we call it. We've been, like the PWG, it's a collective of, the White House, Treasury, CFTC, SEC, Commerce, and all that.
President's working.
Yeah, we've been meeting since January, multiple times a week. And we still do, in my office, literally right now, too, every Friday, to implement all those recommendations. One of those key recommendations that we thought that was critically important for this sector was the cyber portion of it. So what we were doing is like pushing, like how do we get this done, right? So, and I'm sure maybe there's some folks who actually attended the workshop up in Rockville. Was all right. Let's perfect. So we have NIST experts under commerce, right, who are known for the cyber standards and all that. Like let's have the industry talk to them and have them listen and then create a report. So that report is being worked on right now. So I mean, obviously, to have that, I think that's a huge step. Again, we came from nothing.
I want to be fair because it is a fair thing to say. We didn't just come from nothing. You're actually being kind of generous there. We came from kind of like, some people would describe it as active persecution, right? And so it is a fair thing to say that after active persecution to get support, boy, you guys are demanding crybabies who just want more, right? Which I feel like you're not saying, but I would say, right? In the sense of, I'm working all day, every day, and you're just an insatiable beast that wants innovation and regulation, and you want everything perfect. And you did kind of create a monster because you kind of gave all these people who'd been fighting for so long like hope and be like, well, if we can get this, maybe we can get this better. And you give a mouse a cookie. Basically, you gave the industry a cookie. So I 100% agree with that. I think the interesting thing that you're going to see in response to what you said about the kiosks is, if you take the position that kind of like commerce can solve certain things, there are certain things that if you move fast and break them, you can't fix. And one of those things is losing generational wealth to scams, which is a massive problem. And I think what's really fascinating is that I'm seeing this all day, every day, and I think Carole is too. We are seeing state banking supervisors and state consumer protection agencies step up because they are banning these kiosks, they are working on these issues. They're looking at things that as the federal government maybe decides this is something that the market should fix, they are unwilling, even in some Republican states, they are unwilling to wait and let the market fix it when it means a significant percentage of their elderly population losing their life savings, or a significant percentage of the population
not having sufficient consumer protection warnings on these products. So I think it's going to be a really interesting dynamic where we're going to see states step into this field in a way that they haven't in the past, because when the federal government basically says, well, we're not going to enter here in an area where states have a ton of control over consumer protection, I think you're going to see a lot more state activity in response to that very thing, for better or worse.
Harry, let me give you the last word.
No, I think I spoke already too much, but
Not at all.
Ultimately, you know, we are at a very interesting place in time right now, right? This industry as a whole has come a very long way. There are pioneers who went through different, you know, administrations, different careers, private, public. But you know, why this panel? I think it's also important is that we have a difference in views on certain topics, but we have one common view, is that we need this technology to flourish in the United States. I think that's I'll put that as sort of the takeaway here.
Well said. Well said. Well, that was great. That's the time that we have this morning. Harry, thank you so much. Amanda, Carole, thank you to GBBC, and look forward to a great day today.